when we left off before, we just added all the scripts that we need to make our enemy work. So now we're going to put the functionality into these scripts. So let's start with the actual enemy script, because if we open up the enemy script, it's basically empty. The only thing that we added was this little current state. And we will need to add a function for changing the state. So underneath update, we will have to write public void change state. So the change state function needs to change this current state here to something useful. Right now it's not set to anything, and we'll need to set it in the start function at some point. So if we go to the change state function, we say that it takes a parameter of type iEnemyState, and we can call it new state. This function needs to do a few things. First of all, we need to check if our current state isn't null. So if we have a state already, we need to call exit on the current state. So we say current state.exit. And then we need to say our current state is equal to our new state. And then we say current state.enter. And it needs to have an enemy with it whenever we enter a new state, so the state knows which enemy it needs to drive. And the enemy we need to give this current state is ourself. So this, because we are inside the enemy class here. And that's basically what we need to be able to change our states. We change the state by giving in a new state. We check if it exists, if we have a state already. If we have a state already, we exit the current state. We change the current state to the new state, and we call the enter function. Okay, our enemy inherits from mono behavior, and that's not the case, or that's not what we need. We will need the enemy to inherit from what is called from the character script. So basically, we can go here and call this one character, and now we need to override the start function, because our character script has a start function that calls these facing right and my animator, and we can simply just delete the char start function here, the char start debug.log, and the player also has a debug.log. We can also remove that. Inside the enemy start function, we will have to call base.start to make sure that our base function in our character is also called. Okay, the next thing we'll have to do is to make sure that our change state, or our state, is correct or is set. So the first thing we'll have to do is to put the enemy in an idle state. So when we start, we have to say change state and give him a new idle state. This will set the current state here equal to an idle state, and it will call enter and exit and so on the correct states. So now the enemy is in an idle state. Inside the update, we will have to execute the current state, because as you remember, the execute function in each state, this is function here, is the update function for each state basically. So we will have to go to our enemy, and inside update we will have to call current state dot execute to make sure that we update all the time. So if we would go to our idle state, let's find it, go to execute, write a debug.log, and I'm idling. I don't know if that's spelled correctly, whatever. And then we can go back to the game, and if we play the game now, you will see in the console window, if I had it anywhere. Of course, I need to add the script first. Give me a second. Of course, I need to go to the enemy here, and I need to find the enemy script here and add it to the enemy. If I didn't have it, of course, it's not going to call update. So let's try one more time. And then you can see it writes I'm idling all the time because it's inside the idle execute function now. So now my character is idling. Right now the character is still standing in the air, and we would like her to fall from the air and then land on the ground so we can move back and forth at some point. So let's just give it a rigid body. If you select the enemy and write rigid body 2D, and we will need to give her a box collider as well. Besides that, we will need to lock the X and Y. So we need to go to the rigid body and lock the X position and the Z rotation so she doesn't fall over when she starts to walk. So remember to do that. So now when you play the game, she will fall to the ground and stand on the ground here, as the player does. Okay, so now we have a character or an enemy that can land on the ground. The next thing we'll need to do is to make sure she changes or transitions into the patrol state at some point, because she is idling right now, but we would like to have some life in her. So at some point when she has been idling for a while, she will start to patrol back and forth. And to do that, we'll have to make sure we can switch to the patrol state. So we need to go to the idle state. Let's see if we have it already. And in here, we need to make a function called idle, or we can actually also do this in execute if we want to. Actually, let's just do it idle. So public, or let's make it private actually. Private void called idle. And this just to divide it so it's easier so we don't get a cluttered execute function. And in here we need to say take our animator, and we need to access the enemy up here so that we can take the animator of the enemy and set the speed to 0, so that if we come from a walking state, we need to switch it into a idle state, and we do that by setting the speed to 0. If I need to show you real quick here, inside the animator we'll see that we go to where is it? It's inside our operator here. We go, as you can see here, from the action state to our idle state when our speed is less than 0.01. So to make sure we go from an action state into an idle state, we'll have to access the animator and set the speed to 0 down here. And we do that by accessing this enemy that this state is driving. So we make a private enemy called enemy, and we set it equal here, this.enemy equals enemy. So we have a reference to this parameter we give in here, right here. So this parameter here, or this variable here, is always equal to the enemy that we are driving at the moment. In this case, we are driving this enemy. So here we say enemy.myAnimator. And right now you can see I can't access the animator. And the reason that I can't access the animator is because we haven't set an animator from our enemy in the character. Because you can see we have my animator here, and it's protected. But we would like to be able to access it from within the idle state. So we will need to make a property, or we will need to make it public. As far as I can see, it will make it easier for us to make it into an automatic property. So basically try to write something like this: property, tap 2 times, call it animator, and rename this to my animator with capital M. So we have these 2 animators here. When you've done that, you need to delete the old animator, and then there should pop up some errors here. All the places where it says that my animator does not exist, go to those places and replace the M with a capital M. And basically, we could also just have renamed it, but now I did it the slow way. There we go. You can of course do it the faster way by pressing F2 and renaming. I don't know why I did this. Okay, so now we have in our character a public animator, and I'm just going to put it here in the bottom under attack. Here we have an animator, and we can get and we can set it, and we can for good measure make it a private set so that we can't set it from outside. So now we have our animator, and it's public so that we can see it in the character. So we can go to the enemy or to the idle state and say enemy.myAnimator dot set float speed 0. So now we're sure that we go from our moving state into a steady state where we are idling. Okay, so now that we are making sure that we are standing still, we will have to make sure that we can switch into our patrol state after a while. So you might think we can use a coroutine for doing this, but I tried with some coroutines when I was playing around with the project, and sometimes the game actually freezes because of some while loops in my coroutines. So to avoid any freezing, I have decided to stay away from coroutines for my AI, so we don't get stuck in those infinite loops. So instead we are going to make our own timer. So we are going to make a private float called idle timer, and this one will contain the time that we have idled. So at some point we will add some time to this all the time, and at some point it's going to be over our threshold, and when it is like that, then we're going to switch into our patrol state. What else? We need a idle duration, so private float idle duration, and this is the time that we will stay in idle, and this is the time we have been in idle so far. So we go down here in the idle function and say if idle timer is larger or equal to idle duration, well, then we say enemy dot change state new patrol state. Then we enter the patrol state. If we go from, if we have idled in this time, and we need to make sure that idle time counts up all the time. So to count it up every time we run the function, we say idle timer plus equal time dot delta time. And time dot delta time is the time that has passed since last time a frame was rendered or run. So this one will run this time here. So let's go up here and say our idle duration is equal to, for example, 5 seconds. So now it's equal to 5 seconds, this idle duration here. So after 5 seconds he will start to go into a patrol state. So the idle function here needs to be called inside the execute. So just go to the execute and say idle. There we go. So to check if this works, we need to go to our patrol state, and in the execute we can write debug.log patrolling. There we go. Okay, so let's see if this works, if we can actually run the game and patrol after 5 seconds. So let's play this. In the console we are idling at the moment. Let's see if we switch to patrol. And there we go. Now we jumped out of the idle state and into the patrolling state, as you can see here, where we are patrolling. So when he's patrolling, we will also like to be able to go back to idle. So basically she's going to patrol back and forth, and then at some point she gets tired of walking, so she just stops and idles for a while, and then she goes back to patrol again, unless she of course sees the player and wants to kill him. So let's make sure that we can go from patrol back into idle by going to our script. And the functionality we just did in idle with the timer here, well, we need to do the exact same thing inside a patrol function. So basically take the idle function here and copy it and go to patrol state and go down here in the bottom and paste it in. Rename the function to patrol and remove the line that says my animator set float. And then we will need, instead of idle timer, we will call this patrol timer, and just do that both places. And instead of idle duration, we will call it patrol duration. And we will need to create the fields for these, so go to the top and write private float idle patrol timer, private float patrol duration. Let's see, I spelled it differently, maybe capital P, that's why. There we go, shouldn't be capital up here. And then the enemy, of course, so we can actually do the same thing here. We make a private enemy, and this dot enemy equals enemy. And what else? Then we can go down here and everything works. There we go. So instead of entering our patrol state again from patrol when we are done patrolling, we need to enter our idle state. So new idle state instead. So then we will need to execute this idle or this patrol function. So go to your execute function and write patrol. There we go. So let's try to save this and see if we can get the correct text out. Don't worry, we are going to make her move soon. This is just for testing and to make sure that everything works before we start adding the functionality for moving. We are idling, we are patrolling, and it went back right away to idle because we forgot to set a time. So our patrol timer here, or patrol duration for that matter, needs to be set to, for example, let's say 10 seconds. So let's see if it works better now so we don't jump back right away. Now I just get some errors because I switched something while playing. So let's try again. I'm idling for a while. I'm patrolling for a while. So now she's walking back and forth, just imagine that. And after a while, when she gets tired of walking, she will jump back to the idle as she did right there. Now she's idling again, and then she will jump back to patrol again. Okay, so now we can actually change between the two different states, but this is not fun, right? We can't move, so there's no point in this right now because we're just writing something in the console and it doesn't really help our case right now. So we need to make sure that our enemy can move. So jump to the enemy script, and inside the enemy script we will need to make a move function. So think about it like this: the enemy needs to make every single function that will make him or her move, jump, attack. So everything that will make the enemy do something active, well, the enemy itself needs those functions so that the states can take those functions and use them. So all the functionality for doing something is inside the enemy. The stage just uses these functions to make the enemy move around and jump and make it look like it's an actually AI. So we'll need to make a move function that our states can use. So make a public void move. And this function will simply move the character in the correct direction. So we need to make sure it moves it in the direction it's facing. So my animator dot set float speed 1. So we will make sure that our speed is set to 1 so that we moves. If we don't do this, then the character will stand in idle and slide across the floor, and we're not interested in that. The next thing we'll need to do is to make sure that we can move. So we say transform.translate, and now we need to give it a direction. So wait a minute, we should create a function that actually returns a direction based on the way we are facing right now. This function will be built up to something more advanced later. So, but for now we'll just make it instead of just making the calculation right here, because we might as well create the function so we can build upon it later. So let's make a public vector2, not vector3, vector2, and we call it get direction. So the get direction function will actually return a direction to this function up here. So we need to return, not render, but return facing right, vector2 dot right, colon vector2 dot lift. Okay, so what does this code do? This is actually a short form of an if statement. It says, well, is facing right true? If facing right is true, it returns this. If facing right is false, it returns this. So it returns left or right depending on the way the character is facing. So now we can use get direction down here. I'm actually not sure if we should, yeah, let's just leave it like that. And we need to use, what else? Get direction multiplied by movement speed, I think we have, yeah. And of course we also need to multiply by time, the delta time, to make sure that we get the right speed. So time multiplied by time dot delta time. We can put this into parentheses if make it easier to read. And that's it. So now we can actually move the character by using this function. So we say, we start to move, we say, well, animator, we need 1 speed so we can move our character. Well, then we say, we need to access the transform, the translate function to move. Get direction, what way am I facing? Then direction says, well, you're facing to the right. Okay, get direction. The next thing that happens is that how fast do I need to move? Well, I need to move 10, for example, if my speed is 10. But we multiply by time.delta time to make sure that it moves the same way on every single device you are playing with. Time.delta time takes the time into account so that if we run 60 FPS, we won't run faster than if we run 30 FPS when we move around in our game. If we don't do this, then we are going to have a very fast enemy when we have a nice computer, a very good computer with good hardware, and we are going to have a very slow enemy if we didn't do this on bad hardware. So now we have a move function. The next thing we need to do is to make sure the patrol state makes use of this move function. So basically inside the patrol function, patrol state, we can go into the execute function, and underneath patrol we can say enemy dot move. There we go. So let's try to save this, and let's go back to Unity, and let's see what happens now when we go into our state. Before we start, make sure that your enemy has a speed. So click on your enemy and find the enemy script and look at it and see that it has a movement speed which is 0. So let's just give it a, I don't know, 4. Let's try to play the game and let's see what happens. He's idling right now. He's not supposed to move. At some point he switches to movement, and then you can see he starts moving here. But did you see what happened? When he just started moving, he actually switched into our player animation. So I haven't switched the correct animation inside our animator yet. So to fix this, click on your enemy and find your animator and go to ground layer and action states. Find the run function and go to the motion and click on the run. Then find the enemy run and select that one. Yeah, so I basically just missed the run thing. So let's try one more time. We are idling right now. It's fine, and at some point we switch into our movement, and now it looks way better, as you can see here. But as you can see, he pushes the player off the level, and in this game we would like them to be able to pass through each other like this. We don't want them to push each other around. It makes it harder to play the game, and you would like to be able to attack and run past someone. So to fix this, we will have to add a new script, because I would like to create a script that can make 2 objects ignore collision on each other. The reason that I'm making a new script for this is because we're going to reuse this thing on a lot of different things in the game. So to make it easier, we will simply make a script for it. So go to your script folder, right click, click create, and C# script, and call it ignore collision. When you create that, double click on it to open it, and replace start with awake. So private awake, delete update, and in the top here write private collider 2D other, and make sure the field is serialized so that we can see it in our inspector. In awake we simply say physics 2D.ignore collision, get component, collider 2D, so my own collider, other, and ignore true. Okay, so what did this do? Well, it basically, oops, I forgot this. So it basically says that, well, we need to ignore collision between my own collider and an other collider, which is this one up here. And true makes it ignore the collision. If we put false, we stop ignoring the collision. So if you save this, you can go into Unity, take the ignore collision script and attach it to your enemy. And then you can see you have the script down here, and it has an other here which is not set. So you take the player and drag him onto this spot here, like so. And if we play the game now, the enemy should pass through the player now instead of running into him. And as you can see now, they ignore each other's collision, so now it doesn't run into him anymore. Yes, I am going to end this video right here. In the next video we will add some more states and make the patrol state more functional so that she doesn't run off the platform. Remember to follow me on Twitter and like my Facebook page, and do not forget to subscribe, please. If you like my tutorials and you want to support me, then remember that InScope Studios is a community founded page, so all your support is very important to me. You can support me by going to the Patreon page, which also gives you some different perks like private tutoring. If you don't want to support me with that much, you can also just acquire one of my projects or this project if you want to. It will absolutely help me a whole bunch. Also, if you feel like it, feel free to share my tutorials. It also helps me a lot. So thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.